Well, hello class. This chapter is about power. And chapter 5 presents some really challenging stuff about power. Because power is a tool that leaders essentially need to use to influence their subordinates. Now, the definition, sources, and consequences of power are going to be presented in this chapter. Now, as we know, the traditional sources of power, let's say individual power, in this chapter are described along with power sources that depend on the organizational structure. Every organization is different in their sources of power, for the top executives all the way down to middle management, down to what we call the day-to-day functionality. Now, in the upper levels of management, that's usually referred to as the strategic end. The middle level is the tactical end, and the day-to-day functions are basically what the frontline supervisors hear when they've come from all the way to the top down. But one of the things you're going to learn about power is as far as a leader is concerned, is that you don't have to have a sign on the door that says that you have power. In other words, a leader doesn't really have to have a legitimate protocol to influence the behavior of others. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this chapter. So this chapter is also going to discuss the elements of power for teams and team leaders. The causes, consequences, and solutions to power corruption and abuse are also discussed in this chapter. As we know, we've had many influential leaders who are notoriously evil, but they were leaders because they influenced the behavior of others. So we're going to view power in a lot of different ways. But the concept of empowerment is also going to be discussed in this chapter. So you may not be a boss per se or a manager, but you empower others to do things. And even if you are a boss and you trust your subordinates, you empower them to do things that, you don't have to sit on top of them all the time and micromanage them. So this chapter also has a strong cross-cultural flavor to it, with many examples of how power is perceived and used differently in a lot of different cultures. So some of the objectives of this chapter are going to be to define power and its consequences and its cultural roots. Another objective is going to be to apply the different sources of individual and team power to achieve goals. And also, we're going to explain the sources of and process of power abuse, corruption, and destructive leadership and how to prevent them. And finally, we're going to analyze the changes in use of power and the development of empowerment and explain the consequences for leadership. So this is basically what this chapter is going to be about. Now, here's your overview, and then please read for chapter 5, reading, listening, and viewing.